welcome along to unit number 10, our last one for the series. And if you haven't already noticed, they've already been advertising for the next course, which is kicking off in a couple of weeks' time. But I just thought I'd let everyone know, if for those who are interested, or desperate that is, who want to have a bit of a revision week, I'm happy to do something next Sunday afternoon, same sort of time, just to go through a couple of the high points through the notes, if you want to do that. But think about it today, and let me know at the end of today. Ooh, and
it is Father's Day next week, isn't it?
yes.
Okay, as long as you realise it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, think about it. I'm happy to do it anyway, so that's quite okay. Welcome. Anyway, let's get into it. So we had some homework from last week, and part of that was looking through these last couple of chapters of Mark's Gospel. So as you remember, when Jeremy was leading last week, talking about the leading up to the Lord's Supper, and then we start today where they went off into the Garden of Gethsemane, and then Jesus was arrested. And so that's where we pick up the story from today, and these are the particular passages. Anyone have any key thoughts or issues in terms of from the passage we're meant to read for our homework? So at the end of 14, all the way through to 16.
Just how brutal it was.
Sorry?
How brutal it was.
Oh yeah. Has anyone seen the movie The Passion of the Christ? Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of I was a bit tired during the week, so I ended up reading it, but I also, one night I was laying in bed, and I went on YouTube, and you can watch readings and different things of the Gospel, so I put in the verses. So I had a guy reading it, an NIV version, and they had actors in the background acting it out. And it kind of really, it was really graphic, but it was really, I thought...
Wasn't pleasant.
No.
Hopefully, and if you did the homework looking at the New Bible Dictionary about crucifixion, and we'll cover that towards the end, but that was probably a very good description. It's actually quite graphic, but just the pain, the agony of it, and just the brutality of that type of torture, just in terms of from a humanity perspective. Anyway, the notes, so we'll go through a bit of those today as well. Hope you read those, certainly Unit 9. And a couple of good thoughts last week, and we'll pick off, and I thank Roy, he sent me some pictures when they had a trip there, so we'll see some of the photos, just to help get a sense of some of the things. But it's interesting, for a long time I had a different understanding of what in fact is that abomination that causes desolation. And these notes have been very insightful to get to rethink that. I thought that was very useful, just in terms of that. Yeah. I think it really quickly pointed out, in fact, that abomination in terms of the abomination is actually putting the Son of God up onto some planks of timber. Yeah. Yes, it's really good. And welcome, Mary, and sorry to hear the news about your mum. So, glad to see you here today. Yeah. And as we go through some of the things. But let's continue. Is there any thoughts or comments? Thanks, Andrew, for yours, in terms of the reading that we were doing.
Probably there's obviously much more to it than what is in Mark's Gospel. But it's a compelling story.
Of course it is. Yeah. There was a book, when I used to do a lot of beach mission, it was a great book for kids to get. In terms of the story is true and you need to know about it. It's a little booklet for aimed at children. It was really, really good. It was a Scripture Uni booklet back in those days. It was really good because it was a good reminder. And for those of you who haven't, when we finish the course, it's probably not a bad idea just to have a comparison between the other Gospels. And I'll show you that picture in a minute, just in terms of there, just the sort of passages. So even if you just focus on 14 to 16 in Mark, have a look at the comparable passages there in Matthew and Luke. Just the other little bits of detail added in. And the other thing to remember for what we're studying in this particular course, we only go through to chapter 16, verse 8 of Mark. And so when you look at that, you'll see that footnote by the editors there, the most reliable early manuscripts or other ancient manuscripts do not have Mark chapter 16, verses 9 through to 20. Now, just so you're aware, you can put that into real context. Remember when we did one of the earlier studies in terms of the orders of when the Gospels were written? Which was the first Gospel written? Remember that?
Well, it's probably
Good for the
Mark.
exam if you want to do the exam, sorry.
Probably Mark.
Well, yeah, it was Mark. So Mark was the first Gospel that was in fact written. So bearing in mind, the way that I see in terms of this passage happening here is it's a lot like when Mark wrote that. Most of the people were still alive. As we know, the other Gospels were written some period of time after Mark, and then John's Gospel was written a long time, even after the fall of Jerusalem. Right? So there's a fair bit of gap in time. So you can actually conceptually think Mark's readers were the first bunch of people in the church together and stuff like that. They would have known, oh, Mary, you saw, tell us what you saw again. Oh, I heard about this. What happened there, that guard? Were you the centurion? You sort of wonder, did that centurion realise, did he come? Were you the centurion that, wow, what did you see? All those type of things. I think it would have been quite an exciting time in those early days for the church. So that's probably, from my view, why Mark probably ended it where he did. Because he knew the story hadn't really ended. You've got to find out more. There's the people. Go and ask them. Yeah, that's just my take on it, but I think it makes a logical sense. But I would suggest go back and have a look at certainly comparing Matthew and Luke's Gospels as the synoptic Gospels, and we talked about that earlier on, just to see the comparison. Because there's a little bit of extra details in each of those. It's worth noting. All right, let's get on to it today. So as we look through this particular passage, so we're starting there at chapter 14, verse 43. And we see there that Jesus had been arrested. We note that because they'd been in the garden. And it's interesting in terms of, the fight and whatever, and interesting in Luke's Gospel how Luke being the doctor then talks about, the high priest servant, he got cut off, but Jesus healed him. You imagine what that person was thinking after that. Ear lopped off, and then, and we're probably going to hear this, we actually got the most in, we've got another person coming in with another table. Do you guys want to put another table behind you over there? Please. So that way Josh, you and Luke can sit in the corner. But just in terms of what that person would have been thinking about. Wow. He was locked off, and then here's this person, we have arrested him, but he's actually arresting for being someone super, something special, and look what he's done. I think it's incredible. Anyway, who's on trial is what we're thinking through. Might just have to get another, when he comes, just get another chair from outside. Thanks, Josh. Yep. So as we remember though, when we're coming up to this period of time, right, we've been learning about what it is for the kingdom of God. And this is where we really get that final sense of understanding the nature of who is this Son of Man and the arrival of God's kingdom. And hold those thoughts, because the next bit of the narrative coming through Mark starts talking about that. And as we think through when they've got Jesus on trial, and I may have mentioned the week before, we were talking about the Sanhedrin and all that sort of stuff. It's quite interesting when we think through that it really was quite a kangaroo court. And as we recall when we were discussing about the Sanhedrin, their role of being the judicial system as well, there was due process meant to be followed. But here's a classic example with the trial of Jesus. None of that due process whatsoever. So it really was, they were out to get him. And I just find it interesting that they'd arranged with Judas, the betrayer, let's get some sort of sign who the person is. They knew who Jesus was. Why do they? I just find it interesting. Why do they need that sign? Oh, the one I go and give a, that sort of that sort of style greeting kiss to, that's the one. As if they didn't know.
Well, they asked Judas for help, so I assume they thought Jesus would be hard to tracked down at night when there weren't crowds around?
Well, they knew where Judas didn't go to Gethsemane when the others did, so Judas had taken off when they were towards the
But
end
you
of
knew
the
where
Passover.
they were going.
They probably knew they were going to go, but
Yeah.
as if, yeah. But why did he need that special sign? Why not say, that's him? Why did we come up and, yeah.
It's possible the people that went to arrest him were not the people who knew who he was.
Mm.
Well, it's the high priest's servant was there. High priest, yeah.
The servant may not have known.
Possibly.
It would have been very dark. You know, like they just had those torches.
Yes, they're ever-ready torches, yeah. Duracell wasn't around then, so it's they were ever-ready, yes. But it's just interesting. I just sort of think through, I guess, in terms of the physics, the mechanics of how they orchestrated all this. But anyway, so then they get Jesus, they arrest him and take him in. Just it's interesting here. Everyone deserted him. You saw that and fled. And then a young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, they took his clothes and he ran off naked. Hard to work out. Some say it could have been Mark. I don't know. But just bear that in mind. So they put him in trial before the Sanhedrin. But it's interesting. All those, the high priests and the elders and whatever, had all come together. So it didn't actually say, they said it was the Sanhedrin, but it was all the group of them, the elders and the teachers of the law that came together. And they went to the courtyard of the high priest. Now that wasn't the place where they would normally hold a trial. Interesting. Yeah, so in the courtyard, so you can see, kangaroo court happening straight away. They just they didn't know about kangaroos. But who really, when you think about it, who was on trial? Was Jesus on trial here? Or was actually the Jewish leadership who hunted down the Son of Man, the Son of God, the true shepherd of Israel? And they were doing everything that they could to bring about his death. They'd been planning at various things along the way. Remember that through the narrative as we were reading over the whole weeks. They tried to plot his death. They wanted to plot his death. They wanted to kill him, whatever it was. Forget the fact that as teachers of the law and the scribes, they would have known straight away, one of those commandments was, you shall not kill. Interesting. Quite hypocritical. So who really is on trial here? Or is it in fact all of us, as in humanity? Because in the end, as Paul writes in Romans 3:23, for the wages of sin is death. Aren't we all on trial? Aren't we all found wanting? Aren't we all the one that should be dying for our own sins? But here is the Son of Man, the Son of God, the Messiah. He's dying in our place. And he alone is the only one standing there as the true servant of the Lord. And go back to some of those passages we've looked at before in Isaiah, all those sort of things, like a lamb led to the slaughter. All those sort of things. All poignant reminders of what is happening here with this trial.
Is that the paradox then, that the wages of sin is death, but the reality of righteousness
Yes?
is
Romans 5:8. Have a look at that one. Something a little bit group. Now, we know in this particular passage, right, they go there, and we see that little bit of a thing about Peter, right, that preliminary hearing. So Peter then comes on. Now, bearing in mind, as we learned when we were doing one of the early units about the Gospels, who was writing, and Mark got most of his information, I understand, is from Peter. Right? So don't lose that thought. But here he is, and here's the narrative saying, Peter really wants to support the Lord Jesus, but he did flee when they arrested Jesus first, but he followed. He then came to the courtyard. So you always see Peter, yep, all that sort of thing. Bearing in mind what Jeremy had said last week and reminding us in terms of Jesus saying, yes, you will deny me. No, right? I'll fight else. Maybe it's Peter who got the sword out, cut off the high priest's servant ear. We don't know. But there we are. We're seeing Peter in this circumstance. Right? So they're going through that. Now there's a number of questions. I'll get to this in a minute. A number of questions that the trial, this kangaroo court, was trying to do. James bring all these false witnesses in, all that sort of stuff. Jesus didn't respond. And they're going, why don't you say anything? Why don't you say anything? Well, why did Jesus need to say anything? Everyone else's evidence was contrary and whatever, so under the Jew, why open your mouth and say anything? And then the high priest says, well, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And what does Jesus respond? I am. What is that in reference to, do you think?
Burning bush, Exodus 3.
Okay. Yep. What's the story behind that? Josh, remember?
Moses has just fled Egypt after killing a man, and then he's working for another guy, and then he's out in the field, and then the bush starts burning, and he's like, huh? Approaches the bush, and God starts talking to him, how he's going to rescue his people, and how Moses is going to be a part of that.
And importantly, Moses says, but who do I say sent me? Tell them I am who I am. And that's where we get that. I'm not speaking in terms of Hebrew, I don't know it, but sort of where the Yahweh comes from, and the equivalent in English is sort of saying I am who I am. So Jesus is then saying, I am. So straight away, they know, we got you. And then he talks about, and you will see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of the Mighty One and coming in the clouds of heaven. Where's that reference from? Daniel 7. Right? So straight away, Jesus is letting them know Scripture's already foretold about him. But they go, no way, we got him. We got him for that technicality on the blasphemy. Right? We can do something about that. Yeah. It's incredible. They all condemned him, all the people in there, and blah, 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 and then the guards took him off. Right? So then we see Peter in the courtyard, one of the servant girls came up and said, oh, hold on. Aren't you? No, it wasn't me. Well, why was he there in the middle of the night? Just walking his way. And then the weekend, sure that was you? No, it wasn't me. And the third person, hold on, you can tell by your accent, and then like, I don't know the Victorian or whatever, but by your accent, hold on, you're from Galilee. You have to be one of them. No. And all of a sudden, then the rooster crows, and then he realises and remembers exactly what Jesus said, and breaks down and goes away. Incredible. So that's probably a lead up into this heart starter and head starter sort of question.
Can I ask a question? Why did the high priest rip his clothes?
Rent his clothes in terms of showing this severity. How dare someone say something about God like that? How can you blaspheme in such a way? Oh, it's just a show. Yeah.
It was also, they weren't meant to do it, the high priest.
Sorry?
The high priest wasn't meant to tear his garments, I think it was also pointing that out.
Oh, it's really just a pantomime in such a way. It's just incredible.
We see it as a pantomime, but at that time, they didn't believe he was the Son of God, and they were furious.
Oh, of course they were.
Absolutely
Oh,
furious.
yeah.
And, if we condemn them, we condemn ourselves as well. Because
Ah. What did I
the
say?
point of the last one about humanity,
Yeah.
that's what it's all about.
Yep.
Yeah.
We are all just as guilty. And you sort of think through, if I was Peter, what would I have done? If I was one of the other disciples, what would I have done? And there's a really good song Nathan Tasker wrote, but in terms of, it's like the crowd calling out crucify him. If I was in that crowd, what would I have said? Would I have probably gone along as well? So yeah, it sort of gets me to think about those type of things. What would you have said? How would you have said it? Yeah, it's easy for I guess in many ways I don't criticise him because they killed the Son of God. But in terms of, well, what would I have done?
I
think another one of the interesting things about this passage is everyone accusing Jesus speaks better than they know. So that they're all saying, you've heard him say he is the Son of Man, and then they accuse him of being the King of the Jews and everything like that. Everything they're saying about him is actually true. It's just not blasphemy, because he actually is.
That's right.
And the other Gospels record Caiaphas as saying it is better for one man to die for the nation than for the whole nation to die.
Yes.
Again, he's speaking better than he knows. Everyone is speaking better than they actually know.
And how
Because
prophetic
Jesus-
he was in saying that.
Exactly. It was a prophecy,
Yeah.
and they were telling the truth. It just wasn't a sin on Jesus' part.
So when we think of that, that's why I want to talk about this question here. Just think about it and talk amongst yourselves. So there's probably a group of 4 there, maybe a group of 3 there, and a group of 4. Is that going to be easier? Or maybe actually it will be easier. Group of 4 just like that, and a group of 3 on that one. So Joe, you want to turn around and join those guys in a minute. But when is it better to be silent compared to when necessary to speak up? Now, you could say a whole lot of the character names that we've heard about, people like Joseph of Arimathea maybe. Was he there? Don't know. The other disciples, what did they say? What did Peter say or not say?
What's this?
What? Sorry?
I didn't hear the last bit.
Well, in terms of when is it better to be silent compared to when necessary to speak up? And I'm thinking about more so about your faith in Christ. As we're thinking through this, I don't want to focus on Peter's failure in terms of that, not just in terms of this one. But what sort of thoughts did you come up with in terms of that? When is it better to be silent than to speak out? Any thoughts?
I'll be bold enough to say it depends.
Thank you.
Context.
Such an each way.
Sure, it's a sin.
Well, Jesus said that don't cast your pearls before swine.
Yeah.
But that was, to me, was an indication sometimes it's better to keep quiet.
Sometimes it's better not to take the bait.
Sorry?
Sometimes it's better not to take the bait.
I'll take the bait, yeah.
The devil wants you to.
Yep.
Get yourself in more trouble.
That, I mean, sometimes it's actually easier. Most often we probably tend to sway to, I won't say anything, rather than say things would be my, so that's probably me, I probably avoid rather than saying things. There are times when it's probably wiser not to say things, and a couple of good examples there. But in terms of being necessary to speak up,
Because it was interesting is that Jesus was very much the same. He chose not to answer.
That's a good point.
And when he did answer, it was specific.
that's good learning.
He also, I think, I commented that Acts is actually a really good example of when you should be silent and you should speak up. If we're looking at Mark, then Jesus has an incredible ability because he knows what the questioners are asking and why they're asking it, of knowing what they're trying to get out of him and identifying, okay, who are the people who are actually trying to learn something here and who are the people who are just trying to trap me. And then he's responding in different ways in those different situations. So I think we need to be careful, again, not to just take the bait, but also if someone's genuinely asking, then we need to genuinely speak up.
But Peter was just bold not very long ago to say who Jesus was, very bold in saying, who do you think I am, Peter? And he said, you are Christ, the Son of God. And then now he denied. So I think often we come back to our own fear and our own, when we don't speak up, it's more the fear of what our reputation being ruined. And also, Don was saying about Mary Magdalene when she washed Jesus' feet. She was very bold in what she did. So it wasn't, what she did would have ruined her reputation. Yet she was bold in speaking out. She was more conservative with what she was doing about Jesus then. And the same with Peter. Peter was scared. I think he was scared that he was going to might be put up on trial and crucified himself. I think it's the fear of our own reputation being ruined, or the fear of what's going to happen to us that we don't speak out.
And it's interesting in terms of what you said there about Peter being he might be crucified, because in the end, tradition has it that Peter was in fact crucified, but if you don't know the story, actually crucified upside down because he didn't want to be crucified the same way as Jesus was. But very interesting. All right, I mean, sometimes it's just a good challenge to think through some of these situations. Well, okay, what does it mean for me? What do I need to do? I think it's worthwhile thinking it through. So we spent a bit of time talking about Peter in terms of that. As I said, I don't want to focus too much on that. But as we think through Jesus and what he was saying, thanks, Lewis, for your comment. That's exactly right. Jesus stood there for a period of time. We don't know how long all these people came in to make up, give stories or what they thought Jesus said or not said or whatever. So Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. So whether that was for 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 50 minutes, who knows? But it's quite pointed that he stayed silent. So, but when he did respond, he then talked about the fact that he is Israel's Messiah. Now, for those people, they were looking for the Messiah. But they didn't want to see it in Jesus. And that he was the glorified Son of Man. And we've mentioned those passages before, in terms of what Isaiah had said, as well as what Daniel had said. And importantly, where he's bringing the two things together there, in terms of the glorified Son of Man and the divine Son of God. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, and coming on, sitting on the right hand side of the Mighty One. So, Son of God. So all of a sudden he's now bringing all those things together in terms of that couple of lines there in the Bible. So Jesus, we've got to the point now, as we've been through that story. So remember, and thanks Jenny mentioned about, Peter declared that you are the Christ, back in chapter 8. And now Jesus saying, he is the Christ. He is the Messiah. And importantly, in this context, he becomes, all the things we learn about in Isaiah, about the suffering servant. Excuse me, Jack. Now, when we looked at the Sanhedrin last week, we may remember, or actually the week before, remember the powers that they had in terms of what they had to do as a judicial, but they did not have the powers to condemn someone to death. They were a Roman colony, and under the Roman laws, they could not do that. So, remember, as we said a couple of weeks ago too, when Jesus was predicting his death, the 3 times that we record in Mark's Gospel, how it happened? Remember the last one? Remember the last prediction?
Hand of the Gentiles, right?
Yeah. So here he is. Jesus is now handed over to the Gentiles. Now remember, in the early predictions, Jesus said, he'll be the chiefs, the scribes and whatever, they'll reject him. They'll be handed over to man. Then the third one is, they will reject him and then hand him over to the Gentiles. So what in fact Jesus said has now happened. And the leaders condemned him. Now it's probably, as Mark says there, very early in the morning. So it's probably, now our time sequence that we talk about is a little different to how they record the time or whatever. But it's certainly probably well before dawn. So this kangaroo court's happened at night time. And Jesus, of course, has gone through, being handed over to the Gentiles, the leaders condemned him. Now, again, they hadn't actually gone through the right process. That didn't happen until a little bit later. They hand him over to the guards, and then they do their worst on him. Yeah. And that intervening little period there, that's when you hear the story about Peter. So Very early in the morning, chief priests, the elders, so the guards have already beat him and already started doing stuff like that. Take him through to Pilate. Pilate, of course, was in fact the Roman ruler of that, the proconsul of that particular time. As we mentioned about Sanhedrin, they couldn't actually put someone to death. They had to get the Gentiles to do that. So they hadn't followed due process or anything like that. Then it goes through all the charges. Pilate goes through. It's interesting when you look at the other synoptic gospels, the story there. Because you see part of this picture here, and Mark tells us what we really need to know. The other gospels help fill in the picture just a little bit more. We get a broader sense of the dialogue that's happened, and also Pilate becomes a good mate with Herod because he sends off Jesus to Herod at the same time and all that sort of stuff. But in the end, Mark is just sticking to what's the key things that have happened. Arrested, trained by Peter. You can almost think this is Peter's story here. Peter probably didn't worry too much about what happened to Herod, because at that stage he was beside himself with grief in terms of, what have I done? Jesus said I would deny him, and I did. So if you think about it from that point of view. So then they go through, do the crowd. And it's a classic example here in terms of, as we look in Isaiah 53, he was oppressed and afflicted. Right? So you sort of think of what the guards would have been doing to him. And I don't think they talked about a crown of thorns. And Roy, you would have seen some of that when you were in probably Israel, I'm sure. I'm sure we'll see pictures of those crown of thorns. Those thorns were, a couple of, centimetres, like about 5 centimetres long, those thorns. So, and they wouldn't have just gently just put it on his head. They would have rammed it on his head. So that, just in terms of the agony and the pain, and besides being flogged and beaten and all that sort of stuff. He was oppressed and afflicted.
Being without sleep for a long time.
Yeah, being without sleep for a while too, yeah. And yet he did not open his mouth. So he's going through all that sort of stuff. He told the high priest and that Sanhedrin who he was. Right? They didn't believe it. Other than that, he did not open his mouth. And what they do, he's led like a lamb to the slaughter. And as a sheep before its shearers are silent, so he did not open his mouth. So here they are. They've now condemned him to, in fact, imagine, I don't know, can any of you remember when the first time you ever read this? Now most of us have probably grown up in church or whatever, and as kids we probably heard the Easter story and all that sort of stuff. And we tend to sometimes lose the significance of what Mark is saying.
Absolutely.
Because of the way that, we see Easter as a story, and then this happened and then this happened. But for these people, I mean, we know Jesus rose from the dead. But these people, they didn't know that. They heard Jesus say about predictions, and we just said there, exactly as Jesus predicted, it already started to happen. What was the next thing that he said in his predictions after he'd be killed? Yes, that's right. He was rising again. Now, they had probably, whether they had forgotten that or it just didn't come to mind or whatever, and you see that coming through in the story here. But if we put ourselves into the context of what Mark's saying, it must have been really hard. Exceedingly hard for Jesus, having to forego the freedom that he had, and as Paul talks about in Philippians, humbled himself to such a death like this. But in terms of the early disciples, they run away. Classic scenario. So here we are. We're seeing then how this trial, this kangaroo court, has now gone to the point. And interesting, some of the other passages in there talks about Pilate, his view, and the bad dream that his wife had, and telling him don't do anything to this man, whatever. But Pilate acquiesces. In many ways, probably a typical politician. And then, of course, we see the absolute mockery of Jesus by the Gentiles. And as I said before, I don't know, what would you have said? What would I have said if we were in that same crowd? Would we have been rallied up to by those, the Sanhedrin to say whatever?
With or without the Enlightenment.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes it's better to be silent.
Well, it doesn't sound like there was anybody there that was sticking up for Jesus or standing out.
No.
Everybody had gone.
Either they were silent, didn't say anything.
The chances are that we would have done the same. We'd have shot through like a Bondi train.
For those of you who are not familiar, Bondi used to have a tram a long time ago. a long time before the light rail. Just in case for some of you who are somewhat a little bit younger than some of us here. And I never saw the Bondi tram either. I was gone before I was around.
I take it from me.
But thank you for sharing a historical snapshot by Roy. But in terms of, we see here the mockery, putting the robe on, prophesying, well, who's hitting you? All that sort of thing, that mockery. And we hear similar sorts of mockery about Jesus even nowadays.
One question about the robe.
About the what, sorry?
The robe.
Yep.
What is the significance of the purple colour? What's that all about?
Fundamentally, the purple is such a hard colour to actually make.
It was noble, the symbol of
Yeah.
nobility.
Because of the rarity of
Nobles
purple.
of the elements.
Yeah. Because of the rarity of purple. To be able to make purple colour in those days was extremely hard, difficult and rare.
The relax with it, because it's referenced in to Lydia. She was a importer of dye, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Purple dye.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, why would they put that on in there?
Because purple would have been the colour of the king.
Oh, that's not
So they would make